We're live with Star Wars questions. A busy day of filming and a busy day of dancing to our theme music here. Do I even have the thumbnail up? I don't even know anymore. Does it matter? No, I don't, because I'm an idiot. Hey, everybody, welcome to Force Center Show about Star Wars pop culture, the ultimate venture. Answering your questions live. I'm Ken Knapsack.
I'm Jen Landa.
And I'm Joseph Scrimshaw, and I didn't fully realize that we had started broadcasting. That was a personal bop, but I'm glad that the head bop was shared across the galaxy of people watching live right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It was like 3 or 4 weeks. How long have we been doing this? It's been really fun to go live with our Star Wars Q&A. And if you're just joining us for the first time, either live or watching it on YouTube, where it will continue to live, what we do is we get one question from our patrons on Patreon, and that's kind of our main question. But everybody here in the chat, if you have another question, comments obviously on the original question, but other questions, by all means, feel free to put those in a chat. Super chats are not required, but they are appreciated, of course, if you feel like you can help us out a bit. And we also should say, since we're live, we have constructed this bizarre little schedule for ourselves where we record the news on Monday, then we do the Q shows live, then we release the news show on Tuesday. So our news show is almost entirely about the great big interview with Kathleen Kennedy. We're, of course, happy to take any questions here, but that's our whole news show for tomorrow. Ken, did I forget any business?
No. I think, it does get confused even when trying to figure out, what did I say? Did we say that? Hey, remember the thing I said? Oh, no, you hear that tomorrow. So look forward to that. It's a deep dive into the news story there. But like Joseph said, it might pop up today. But if we kick the can to tomorrow, that's why. But happy to be here. And, 30 seconds before we went live, I was in my backyard negotiating with a Chihuahua, which is why I think I'm settling into the show with a little bit of a...
Who won? Who won the negotiation?
The Chihuahua won, because there's no thumbnail on the top of this live stream today, which is nothing that matters in the grand scheme of things. But I was like, wait, Franny, I gotta go. I gotta go to work. I got to go to work does not translate into dog world.
I think the thumbnails now should just rotate between your Chihuahua, Jen's dog Mala, and sadly I don't have a pet, so I'll just post random pictures of squirrels or frozen pizzas, and those will be your thumbnails forever.
Very much good work.
All right, let's get into this question. This one came to us from Eli, is the name in Patreon, but by a different name. We are seeing Star Wars in a Galaxy in the chat saying, "Hey, Force Center friends, this is my question. Admittedly, I am a pretty darn big Star Wars as high fantasy fan. So here is the question that we'll be talking about today. Hello, great people. Like all of you, I love the buffet approach Lucasfilm has been taking to Star Wars since its purchase by Disney. And I genuinely appreciate all the different aspects they've chosen to explore in the lens of Star Wars. However, there's one ingredient that I think has gotten a little bit left behind: high fantasy / mysticism. Don't get me wrong, there have been mystical elements in projects like The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, The Acolyte, and Star Wars Rebels, but the only project since the purchase that I feel has fully committed to the high fantasy mystic tone and aesthetic is season 1 of Ahsoka, and I expect this to continue with season 2. What do you think about Star Wars' relationship with the more high fantasy mysticism elements, and how do you think that side of Star Wars should be handled from here on out? This is great. I think there's so many different ways to define the different elements of Star Wars. And I think Eli's specificity in high fantasy in mysticism is a really interesting way to combine some of the elements. So, Jennifer, for you, when you hear the phrase high fantasy mysticism in Star Wars, what does that mean to you?
To me, it makes me think of The Empire Strikes Back. And maybe it's just because of when I saw it as a kid, it just felt very mystical and, otherworldly and magical and all the things that I associate with high fantasy. And now I'm not an expert at all. I just love the idea of like Star Wars mixing with like potions and like hobbitness and like cozy little storybook homes and like that's like to me what I want, which is not accurate at all. I'm sure all of you out there have a lot more better ideas, or like quite frankly what they did in the Clone Wars. There was a lot of mystical elements in high fantasy in the Clone Wars, and I'd love to see that in live action. How about that?
Yeah, Ken, for you, how do you just define high fantasy mysticism for yourself? What does it mean?
Yeah, the line was drawn for me early as a kid, and I'm on both sides of the line. But like high fantasy was H.R. Puffin stuff, but I preferred the gritty realism of a large bird talking to a fake elephant he was maybe dreaming up. That was my realities that I love.
That is an excellent use of the word high when describing H.R. Puffin stuff. If any of our younger viewers don't know H.R. Puffin stuff or the entire oeuvre of its creators, man, have some fun binging that.
Yeah, but the high fantasy for me, again, I think Empire Strikes Back is a great example of it in Star Wars. It's present. I think it's one of the great building blocks. It's one of the things I loved about Ahsoka Season 1 because it tied into some of the things I loved about Rebels and I loved about the Clone Wars. As much as I've spent years on this show saying I like the war over the lore, meaning I like the on the ground kind of politics and fighting of Star Wars more than maybe what's going on with the Jedi and their philosophies, which maybe has changed over the years anyways for me, but it does it. I love stepping over. I loved the Mortis arc, the first moment. So in terms of the definition and what it means to Star Wars, it is just, it's not so much about dragons and swords, which can be the generalization of high fantasy. It is using fantastical things to explain the unexplainable inside of ourselves, and I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. I love the use of the word high fantasy because I think there is like a collection of identifiable ingredients or tropes. You know, a dark wizard, a sword pulled from a stone, a castle, a wise, a wizened creature that lives inside a tree, little turtle folk, like in Ahsoka,
Yes.
and that contrast between the hobbits and the Eye of Sauron, the light and the whimsical and the real and the lovable versus the sort of almost over the top depiction of human evil as this sort of force that is always present out in the darkness that must be fought. There are all these things that you can really assign to it. But I think in Star Wars, for me, I think on a practical level, it's high fantasy and mysticism is sort of the meeting point of the spirituality of Star Wars, of everything having to do with the Force, and Lucas's love of pulp. And when I think of high fantasy, it can range from things that are very, very much just attached to the idea of belief in that we are all connected and that there's something larger than us. I think the whole mythosaur business in The Mandalorian is kind of high fantasy because it's tied to, our beliefs in, is the mythosaur real or not? Does it matter if it is? Is it just a symbol of something that we believe? But then high fantasy and mysticism to me can also just be like the absolute pulp fun of the Night Sisters in Clone Wars and Ahsoka. I think Kenobi is so grounded in the Jedi story, the spirituality and the Force, but there's those just visuals. Vader's castle, we kind of get used to it, but that is damn high fantasy. And in the middle of grounded, gritty Rogue One, this is a real war, and that evil sorcerer lives in a castle above a lava waterfall, a lava fall. That is high fantasy. I love Vader and Kenobi, that they have their fight on the mysterious stabby rock moon planet that looks so beautifully high fantasy. So for me, it's that mix of the kind of the pulpy. I would expect to see this on a dirty old paperback from the 1970s with the deep spirituality. And I agree that I think Ahsoka is the show that leaned into both of those the most.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, some of my favorite stuff of Ahsoka was, I don't think it was a surprise that we go to a world between worlds type of setting, but when they went there, and I thought it was executed well, some of my favorite stuff. So I hope they explore more in season 2. I absolutely know Dave well.
Absolutely. Jennifer, you were a big fan of the Acolyte, and you were pulling up exactly yeah, so go for it. What are your Acolyte thoughts?
Yeah, I like JJ's comment. The Acolyte had its very spine built out of mysticism and philosophy, I feel. I think that's what I loved so much about the show, is it really was diving into the cultures that I've gravitated towards, with the witches, which is for me didn't quite play as well in Ahsoka, which I won't go on to. But like That's what I loved about the Acolyte. There was just so much like almost like whimsy and like magic. But what is this magic? Obviously, it's it's the Force, but they're not typical Force users as we know it. And I just loved everything about the Acolyte, and I think that Leslie Headland really appreciates and enjoys high fantasy, right? Am I imagining that wrong? I don't remember.
Yeah, she said so many wonderful things in interviews. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
she clarified that. But yeah, the Acolyte, I think, there's a lot in there that is about the politics of the Jedi and the sort of politics of groups and societies, and can individuals kind of escape the pull of groups, and all of that can almost get very political. And then for me, when I was looking at this question, I was trying to think of other examples of high fantasy, and I think a bunch of witches who move to a special planet that has a hole that leads down to power, and they're doing their rituals and pulling who knows. I mean, that's just so fantasy of just sort of like metaphor that is so just like clear and beautiful and simple, that we're connected to the earth, and down deep in its core there's some sort of power, and maybe we can pull it out, and maybe we're meant to, or is that manipulating? And I don't feel like the show answers that. It just gets into those really interesting questions that make it a very mystical feeling. Ken, how do you feel about any examples that you love of high fantasy or mysticism in recent Star Wars?
Oh, recent Star Wars. Yeah, I definitely look at the Book of Boba Fett had a lot for me. It's a grounded story of the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter, kind of going on a mystical journey, a spiritual journey, and whether it's a mystical little creature lizard going up his nose to take him on a magical journey, and not fully understanding it, and not 100% caring what's real about that vision and where he got that branch, or was it on? I don't need to know any of that. I just need to know that it was the magical journey, and I love stuff like that. The Acolyte is full of it. Jen, you're absolutely right. Full of wonderful examples, and Mother Anastasia remains one of my favorite things of that series, and including the unexplained aspects of it too. I think for me, high fantasy often. For someone who finds himself mostly grounded, personally, maybe not grounded, I'm slip sliding away all over the world, but is drawn to more of the just two people talking at a table is maybe what I like. But I love when things come up and I don't know the answers, but we need to react to them. Game of Thrones season 1, I had no idea what I was getting into in that show, and I was definitely there for the people at tables having conversations, but I was pulled in 30 seconds in because these mystical white zombie creatures north of the wall showed up, and I was terrified by it. And pulled in by the unexplained, and how I react to it. And Star Wars needs that all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Another one that strikes me is kind of mystical when it's really about the spirituality. I love that in Mandalorian, without really talking about it much, we've now seen 2 sequences where the armor goes through her ritual of, I'm going to make you a new piece. I'm going to reshape this Beskar and make you a new piece of armor. But you have to sit here and listen to the hammer ring out. And either by choice or some mystical property of the hammer, you will relive your trauma as your new armor is forged. We saw that early, Din sequences where he's rethinking his childhood. And we see Grogu start to his poor little teeth bared as he is forced to face his trauma. I love that the trauma hammer.
The trauma hammer, absolutely.
That's great to me. But I think a thing about high fantasy that's fascinating to me is I think some people might say, hey, I don't like fantasy. I really don't like high fantasy. And maybe you don't. But I think a lot of people don't like bad fantasy. I think, Lord of the Rings sort of codified a certain vision of here are the ingredients, and then D&D comes along and has to literally add rules to it and specifics to it. And I remember as a kid having rip-off books that I think they were called Which Way books, and they were they were a rip-off of Choose Your Own Adventure books. There was also just totally we are in the land of the ice, whatever, who cares? It wasn't done with emotion. Wait a minute. Or mystery. It was just let's just take the surface. I even worked for a company once, I won't say what, that they would take certain properties and they would say scratch the serial number off, and they would have a property that was supposed to be about like gaming in Vegas, then to be make it about cave trolls. And I think people don't like fantasy when it's just the slap the surface of the list of characters and traits on it. And I think people love high fantasy when it gets into also mysticism, spirituality, mystery. And you have gone up and down with fantasy. How do you feel about when it's good for you and when it's bad for you?
First of all, so I was a big fan of Choose Your Own Adventures. I was not familiar with which way, but is it which as in way, or is it which way?
It was the which way book of like, who do you choose to put a curse on? Is it Billy?
I think we might have stumbled onto a moneymaker right there. My relationship to it, right? Yeah, it's because I didn't grow up with D&D because that was the spawn of the DevVal and was not allowed to touch it and just didn't engage with it on that. So I think I grew up thinking, I became a sports fan, but I always loved Star Wars. And so sometimes I do have that, like, I don't know if I'm big on fantasy. But actually, the reason I'm here for Star Wars, as much as I want to talk about the blaster bolts and the stormtroopers and the rebels fighting, it's the sword and the stone. It's the kid with the blade. It is the looking out and seeing if you can roll 20 for your fate, like in your adventure. Like, I'm on board for that kind of stuff and you get pulled in pretty easily. And I like it. And I think you're right. Bad fantasy or just the perceived bad fantasy, like anything. Like, I'm a stand-up comic. There's a lot of bad comedy out there, too, that I would agree that, I'm not even talking about what they're saying, but just the quality. So I don't want to hold that against fantasy. But I love that. I love the magic of Star Wars. It seeps in whether you want to or not. And you might show up for Andor first. Andor, this buffet. Andor seems to be, on the surface, lacking some of the high fantasy stuff, but then Dewey and Freedy show up, and no, you're in it, man. You're smack dab in it.
Jay from Nowhere is helping us write our Which Way books. For light as a feather, turn to page 57. For stiff as a board, turn to page 213.
Oh my gosh.
Jennifer, have you ever had negative feelings about like high fantasy where you think it's too much or too dorky or any of the kind of
No. Thing? If anything, I felt like I loved it and I wanted to be a part of it, and I felt like people didn't let me in. I felt like there was a real kind of gatekeeping aspect. If you don't know XYZ, you can't be a part of this. I loved Lord of the Rings, but it did kind of feel like, well, blah, blah, blah. And so there was a little bit of that with Game of Thrones. I mean, I did read some of the books, so that did help. But it felt like that kind of just leveled the playing field. And I'm not going to get into whether Game of Thrones is like high fantasy or low fantasy or whatever we want to say, right? But I just feel like that's what I think Star Wars has done really well, is it has kind of opened it up to make it accessible to even if you're not familiar with it, or even if that's not really your thing. And I think that there could be more of it. I would love for there to be more of it. I really gravitate towards these type of stories, but it's one of those things where I didn't feel like I could join in the fun. But Star Wars was kind of my way in to join the fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. Yeah.
So accurate. This is so accurate still, Bill. I wasn't cool enough to be a part of those nerd groups. Yes, I was the kid by myself eating the lunch because even the nerds wouldn't have me. I was in the photo room, developing film and stuff like that.
Yes.
I'm flashing forward to the early 2010s where I started hanging out with some now very famous nerds, and I did not feel I was cool enough to be at their table. It's a real thing. Jeff.
It's a real thing.
Absolutely. I think it's there can be a gatekeeping aspect to it. I think even when people don't intend it, they learn everything about it. And you could have powered 1,000 stuns on the phrase, but in the books, when it comes to Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. And I think some of that is passion that ends up being very, very misdirected, right? Thinking about what kind of fantasy Game of Thrones is, and Ken is obviously a Game of Thrones expert, but I think one of the strong appeals of Game of Thrones is I think it is the debate about the value of fantasy is the text of the show from the beginning, is the magical, the dragons, the possibility of the Night King. All that is like, come on, don't be children. This stuff isn't real. And that's got a really interesting relationship to how we were introduced to the high fantasy elements of Star Wars, because Han Solo is that voice in A New Hope. How different would Star Wars be if Han showed up and he's like, "Oh yeah, Jedi. Yeah, I read all about those guys. Yeah, pretty cool. I heard they can throw rocks. Can you do that?" The fact that he's like, "Nah," it makes us as audience members go, it's real. And I think it heightens our love of it because you have somebody denying it, and it puts us in that wonderful audience position of feeling like, "No, it's true. Oh, and I'll be validated. Damn it."
I agree with that a lot. I mean, you make me think of Mandalorian season 3. One of, I think, our collectively shared favorite moments here is Bo-Katan going, none of that bleep was real. It's what they told kids. It's pomp and circumstance. Holy crap, I'm staring at a beast. Love that moment. I think it works, and that's kind of fun, and it's a good way to, whether it's guiding you in or just, you're right. Star Wars would have been different if he's like, "Jedi, great. Hey, let's gather up. Can you teach me this? I love this stuff." Yeah, I love Han's perspective. It helped pull me in. I was an example of that.
And then it's true, all of it. So, Jennifer, where do you want to see high fantasy mysticism go in upcoming Star Wars?
I'm just thinking to our Kathleen Kennedy conversation, and I'm like, okay, so what's on the docket? Mando and Grogu? Maybe there might be some in there. Probably not as much as I'm imagining. I think you guys are right, though. I think Ahsoka season 2, whenever that's happening, I want to dive in deep to Mortis. I want Dave to go full high fantasy. I want him to do it. Don't hold back. Go full Clone Wars, and I think we're gonna get it. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree with that. I think Ahsoka season 1 is such high fantasy from that sort of surface level to here are the very Tolkien like turtle folk, and I know they have a Star Wars name. I'm just forgetting it. The idea of there is another galaxy, and here's the strange map that allows us to find it, and the fact that they're heading to Mortis. And we still don't know what Balin's actual goal is. His only stated goal is, we've been on a horrible cycle, and I think I have a way to stop it. That seems real mystical. I continue to think he's going to be like, I'm going to enter Mortis and reset reality. Which means going into Mortis and dealing with issues of, should we have that power? Is that power even accessible to us? The really high fantasy stuff of, the divide between the godlike and the mortal in Mortis.
The Mortis guy. Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that. Other than just to maybe get some answers, and happy that Rory McCann is on board to take that role even further. Though we do miss Ray, but
Nodi, thank you.
The Nodi,
yes, the Nodi, not just the turtle folk. They have a name, and it's Nodi.
Not Yordle.
The Tuskens. It's the spot for it. I think there's definitely things we don't even know about it. I love an animated show that gets to explore it a little bit more. Bad Batch. Yeah, I mean, you're being chased by crabs, large crabs. Like that's high fantasy. That's always, what was I thinking? But yeah, I'm excited for Dave, a man, let's not forget, dressed up as Plo Koon and walked around Burbank in 2002. I'm excited for him to continue and give some answers through the use of fantasy in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, I think even something like Bad Batch, which is because they are soldiers, is grounded a little bit more in the sort of war side of Star Wars. But then, all of it is at the center of that last season is an evil wizard wants to clone himself. It's you never entirely get away from it in Star Wars.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. We got Joshua Bernard saying, bring back Bendu in season 2.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised to see the Bendu at all.
That'd be cool.
It wouldn't be. Yeah, no. To his credit, Dave doesn't forget. Like we joke sometimes about Meeber Gascon. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a mention of Meeber at some point. Like it's, and the Bendu is a great example of a kind of a mystical creature with great things to say that doesn't have we don't need to worry about where he came from or who he was.
And we're all focused on Mortis and that too, but the Night Sisters have an ancient culture there, so I imagine there's some horrible Temple of Doom temples under the surface of Peridia, and
a witch riding a rancor. I don't know what
Oh,
level
please.
that is on the
Oh,
fantasy scale.
please.
Low, high, mid, doesn't matter. That is fantasy.
It's high fantasy
Want.
in every way.
Oh my
Physically,
gosh.
literally high fantasy. Let's take a look at some of the thoughts that have been sent in and some questions along this topic. We got a good one here from our friend 8984M, who says, what do you think of fantasy elements from other parts of the world? I think Star Wars incorporates lots of non-Western tropes too. Yeah, and I think it is, people are often wise to point out the discussion of Star Wars as a Western is Star Wars as a Western, as Westerns were influenced by samurai films. So it is such a mixture of those ideas. Jennifer, what do you think about this question?
This is a great point. It's a conversation my husband and I have had a lot about, like, different myths from different cultures, and why are we only focused on certain types of myths, and are there other, where can we get more stories and have more diversity in those stories? But I think if you're going to do that, you should have somebody who really knows what they're doing. That's good. I can't really see it happening based on the slate that we're getting with Sean Levy, Mando and Grogu, even Mangold. I think we're kind of going in a certain direction. But Star Wars Visions has been great at that. So maybe we'll get more of diversity there. Sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think I would love for creators behind the camera who have more non-Western perspectives to be able to play with that. I think that's one of the great things about Star Wars Visions, because George was so inspired by Eastern philosophy and storytelling that it was great to have that present in actual Star Wars. But I would love a lot more of that. I think a thing that I see people talking about is just like some of our back and forth about the Jedi is like the Jedi are a little bit that idea of like, we are very, very committed to our faith, and we deny ourselves some of the things that other people might have. Is, it doesn't always go as well with our sort of Western, like, you should be able to have it all. You should be able to have be a hero and have 3 wives and 8 jobs. Yeah. Ken, where do you go with this?
Yeah, it's you both mentioned Visions, and they mentioned in chat. Yeah, I think that's a great example of going to the cultures as opposed to taking from the cultures, or just being influenced by things as well, or inspired by some of these stories. I don't necessarily think that's inherently bad, but I love Visions just going directly to the sources in a lot of way, and that's been powerful for a reason. It's connected with people for a reason. Could Star Wars expand that? Could they do a Star Wars film in Japanese language only, or there's different markets to play with. Could you ever see that? I think it's possible. I think it's possible as the world expands. But I agree with Jen, to your point of that's the different folks behind the films. From the actual different parts of the world and perspectives, and that would make it even more powerful. You're making me also think though of the 70s and 80s that we all dealt with, where Star Wars promoting quote Eastern mysticism is something I mention a lot, because Star Wars was almost yanked away from me from my parents and others in our community because of the very problematic point of view they had on what Star Wars was promoting from other cultures. So it's something we have to work through and build a better storytelling future from.
Yes, 8984M. It has to be from the person behind the camera, not just the screen, by people not versed in that culture. That's exactly it. Well said. Well said.
Ken, do you see any questions in our starred section or comments that you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Todd Roy, Peter Jackson kept LOTR in reality, and that's what I would like from fantasy and Star Wars. Yeah, and I'm with that too, where I think they do a good job of that. And I think it goes a little bit what you're talking about, Joseph, of the bad high fantasy, which for years was just, it didn't have the budgets, it didn't have the money. And I'm not talking about the animated Lord of the Rings classic or that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about I don't know, even the 1990 Captain America film. Like we had that to deal with. And one of the big victories of Peter Jackson was, no, we took this serious. We gave it the respect that it deserves. And that's why it translated so well to the screen and was part of what moved things forward. Phantom Menace was in that era. Matrix, I think you could argue a lot of fantasy elements there, right? So, but yeah, I do like what Todd is saying there about just the idea that it seems more real than you might actually think it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I can't point to any one specific example from the 80s, but I think, anybody who kind of grew up in that era will kind of know the vibe of like, you hear a voice saying, the noble folk did this and the wizard did that. And like, and I think you get some bad fantasy stories they're just the archetypes. And I think what Lord of the Rings was such like an amazing triumph because it so quickly moved past the archetypes. The archetypes are there and they're fun and they're meaningful. But you were following Frodo, not that hobbit. Yeah. Some people would forget Frodo's name, like my friend's mother who said 3 hours and they didn't get to the damn mountain. But about the first one. But because it's a real human story and you felt for Frodo and it was human, and Star Wars has always been that too. It's not just the archetype of robots and a pirate and a sort of chosen one figure of Luke. It's not just those archetypes, it's the characters.
Indeed. I do love Amaranth's comment here though, but maybe we can get a Bendu and Cathalop's buddy comment. Absolutely think that's what we need.
I love this comment by Rich Rodriguez. Hi, Force Center crew. My biggest hopes for high fantasy lies with James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi film, biblical high fantasy that will define everything to come. I suddenly got a flash of like the 10 Commandments, right? Like Lawrence of Arabia. Like just, I need to see that. Well, if the Cinerama Dome ever comes back, like this is, I want to see that. I had never really thought about it, that Dawn of the Jedi could be this like biblical high fantasy. That's fascinating. And now I want it.
Yeah, Mangold has kind of talked about it in those terms. And I kind of feel like, how do you tell the story of people not only being in touch with this, larger force, but deciding, should we use it? And if so, how? It's not like a prospecting film where they're going to be like, we're mining on Octo and we discovered the fort, right? It is by definition spiritual of like, we're all connected to this. We agree it's there. It can affect us, but we can affect it. Should we use it is so spiritual.
Ooh, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. The vision too, Jen, of a Jedi parting the waters.
Yes, exactly. Who was that? Charlton Heston? I can't remember. Moses.
Svenick says, didn't he cite 10 Commandments as inspiration?
There you go.
He possibly could have,
There you go.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be a while before we see that film, and I think for me, like I think it is going to be spiritual, but is it going to be really grounded, or is it going to be more high fantasy? Because you could go with a spiritual story that is very socio-political. Of we have tapped into these deep powers, and there are people that we could help, but it would mean making these big decisions about the way a community should be, and we're taking it upon ourselves to make that decision. And that gets into very like acolyte, sort of like who has the right to wield what power in what circumstance. Or it could be very, very, more straightforward high fantasy of like there's a dark wizard and the octopus folk need to be rescued. It could be much more tropey.
Tropey. Love that. Billionth _ Kevin says, love how each new piece of Star Wars showcases a different piece of Star Wars personality. Still want it to be accessible to all fans, but I don't mind it going weirder in every direction. Yeah, absolutely. I love the use of personality. We talk about the buffet because, I don't know, I think of food more than anything else in my life. But I like that, Star Wars has a bunch of different personalities. It can move from room to room in a house party and talk with anyone. And it has that ability to connect with everyone by staying true to its roots. And fantasy being part of that, I like it when the boundaries get pushed a little bit. It's fun for me.
I do have I've known people who love Rogue One and are just taken out of it by Vader's castle.
Really?
I think,
Okay.
yeah, because
That's surprising.
it's Disney, it's a castle, it's super high fantasy now. We're in this grounded. I feel like, at least from the comments we're getting in chat, I don't feel like a lot of people feel that way, but I feel like Star Wars can be very grounded, and the main point is, in a different genre. I think the Solo film is much more in the Western samurai, crime and criminals and pirates. But the whole trip through the Maw and the Sum of Verminoth is basically a weird, unknowable Cthulhu thing, and Han's just like, yep, that's the galaxy. What you gonna do? I think there can be. I find it fascinating when there's like really high fantasy, cosmic horror elements in a character like Han's. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. The castle, like, I understand it not from my own point of view, but just I've had a couple of people in my life where they were so just against anything that I put into the nerd bucket, but really, which is a whole nother conversation, but like the fantasy stuff. And I just always tell this one particular person, like, you lack whimsy. You lack whimsy in your life. You lack the imagination beyond what's on the table in front of you. Like, I think, hearing that someone would be in that movie and all of a sudden, oh, there's a castle.
I love this comment by Osvetnik 1138. Where else would Vader live? A high rise on Coruscant, a lakeside villa, a duplex? Yes, he deserves a castle. Come on, people.
Yeah, I think we've seen Vader in lots of like gleaming corridors that are much more about sort of production design, to reinforce this sort of a mechanization and uniformity of the Empire. And like the nicest space we've ever seen him in is Bespin, and that frankly looks like the Airbnb that Vader could rent for dinner parties.
Yes.
Kind of is. He just doesn't pay the rent. So I get that, but at the same time, it's like, wait, where is he gonna live?
Yeah. I didn't think of that growing up, and I know that part of it too is finally seeing the castle was like going back to the mythical McQuarrie War and drawings from Empire and Jedi and the mythical stuff that was supposed to be there but wasn't.
I just have a picture of him just still living in Padme's apartment.
Something about it doesn't fit. It's not me. I need something that's me.
Oh my gosh.
I understand.
Yeah.
Jay says this, I like high fantasy, but not necessarily when they bump up against the more grounded war aspects of Star Wars. I wanted to bring that up because it's part of what we're going here. And again, fully understand that too. I've had a little bit of those moments over the years too, when you're in a lane, and the car shifts over as it's going to.
Well, I think that's a good question for me. Of like, I think almost everybody we've seen in the chat, likes Mortis, wants more Mortis in Ahsoka, wants the high fantasy gloves to come off and let's go wild with Mortis. But like from a design perspective, like I love Mortis, but from a design perspective, like the father looks much more traditionally like wizard guy, without as much sort of Star Wars spin on it, arguably, as has come before. Jennifer, do you think just like the way the fantasy is visually executed makes a difference for you?
Oh, 100%. I need to get a vibe from it. It's got to give me cottagecore vibes, or else I'm not going to be in it. I have a whole board on my Pinterest for this kind of stuff. I don't know. I was thinking about this. I feel like Disney Plus is where they can experiment. Right. He looks like the Led Zeppelin. So yes,
he does.
Yeah. But I feel like they really can experiment on Disney Plus, as Kathleen Kennedy was talking about. And I would love to see just a total rockin' high fantasy show on Disney Plus. I think it's harder to sell the broader audience on it in a movie. You can have the elements, but it's not going to be like full Lord of the Rings kind of thing if you're going to go to the movie theaters with it. I think you might alienate some people, like you're talking about with the castle. Although maybe if you're like, this is fantasy, get on board. right?
Mhm.
Maybe
Mhm.
that would help.
I think space fantasy is the best overall descriptor, and then it's all about adjusting
Yeah.
levels based on the story, based on creators' tastes.
Hmm.
Ken?
Yeah. No, it's a real concern. I remember, and I've number one come around on puffer pigs, into space whales, aka whales, aka Purgle, are great for me now. But I never had a super big problem against them. It's just I remember when though they merged in Rebels, and at the same time there was a lot of this call for Dave to do a lot more in Star Wars, which he is now, but back then it was a little bit different. And I just remember thinking to the people calling for Dave at that time to do more Star Wars wanted a different kind of Star Wars. When I was like, the dude brought in whales floating in space. I don't think you understand what he'd bring to his live action Star Wars. And here we are years later, and they're there, and the witches, and this and that, and I love that about Dave. Even though back then I too was, we got flying whales. Let me work on it, which is why I understand Jay's comment, and I think you started his Jay's follow up comment, right? Yeah, Star Wars buffet is great, and I'm all for it, but I don't sort of want ice cream on top of my steak until you try it, Jay. But no, but I feel that sometimes too. And even Joseph, Jed, you've worked with me long enough to know, like, where I show up to a podcast recording and I'm like, I don't know, the speeders were bright.
Yeah.
Let me work through it.
Yeah.
Let me get there. In the past, I'd rail against it, but now I'm like, all right, why were the speeders bright? And what did that mean? And what does the high fantasy mean?
I relate to what Jay is saying about tone. To me, I think it's also about genre and how is it blended. Like Dewey and Freedy could have been a bump with how few aliens there were in Andor, how incredibly gritty and real it is, but they blended right in because they felt real and honest. The Acolyte, there was I can't remember the exact episode, but I feel like we were kind of cutting back and forth from really heavy stuff and some comedy with who is the little guide? I'm forgetting everyone's name today. The little furry guy who made
the
like
little
weird
guy.
choices.
Yeah.
Somebody will tell us in the chat. I apologize that my brain is
Basil.
Yeah, God, years of trivia has just beaten any retention out of my brain.
Yes. Basil from Faulty Towers. Yes, of course.
Yes, I know more. I know that more than
yes. There was like a bit of it was the episode where May had stuck on board, and with heavy dark intentions and needing to find out what awful thing did Soul do, and then there was like kind of a comedy beat of Basil kind of spraying her in the face with the thing, and like so for me that was a moment where like that dance that Star Wars always does, that Lucas loved, from the very, very deep to the very silly. To me, it has to be balanced right, and has nothing to do. I love that there was a weird little tracker guy who screamed and made bad decisions.
Yes,
it was the tone of that scene in context with what else was going on emotionally with the characters.
Yeah. That's definitely it. Yeah, the success of Dewey and Freedy, I do always want to spend time with, because just rewatching the series, I mean, you're going from Narkina, that the darkest of darkest arcs maybe in that show, of this prison industrial complex, this escape, the emotions of what's going on with Kino Loy, and then the next episode it's like, hello, squigglies, and it's just like, and it works, which I think is part of the power of Star Wars, because
emotionally their message is scob the Empire, right? And if one of them was like, scob the Empire, and then did a little toot, you could go right from, Luke's, what did I give? Everything. Excuse me. It is.
I like this. Basil wasn't balanced very well, in my opinion. You know what it makes me think? I think that they could have gone weirder, like more goblin-like with Basil, and then I would have enjoyed it more. Because me with the creatures, I love them. To me, there's something like kind of Ewok-like about him, but not quite to make me love him enough.
He was an agent of chaos, and I would have loved for them to go even even farther with that. Yeah, since we're talking about Jay's comments, I just want to let him say, yeah, tone is exactly it. He says maybe it says high fantasy versus low and more serious versus whimsy, and I think that's it for me too. Of like, give me the weirdest thing you can think of in Star Wars. I want the pulp. I want the weird. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that George Lucas created. Is don't be limited. Have fun. Go wild with your imagination, and then just make it all blend. So you don't get bounced out of the reality of the characters. Like, give every character a castle and a cape, as long as they're real.
Yeah.
That's why Kim from Skeleton Crew was so fantastic. To me, that felt very like fantastical, like Harry Potterish was not whatever, you know what I mean? But like there was just something, and my kids didn't even bat an eye, and they were wondering why I was freaking out so much. I'm like, this is just great. This is why I love Star Wars. It's just like weird. But the tone was right. The tone was right for the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely weird. Yeah.
So more feral Basil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's catch up with him and his strange history. He becomes a Jedi killer. Maybe he was the Sith Lord all along. Anyway, Ken, you see other questions or comments that you'd like to grab?
One I just thought was really great, going back to the Vader Castle conversation. Geek Eric says, if you're going to build a monument to the place where your life was ruined and you were turned into a monster and you've got the wealth of the Empire behind you, it's not going to be a quaint little hovel. Yeah. No. That's my little it's my little 2-room duplex up on Hollywood Way there. It's a classic piece. It's from old Hollywood. It's Spanish tile.
I wish he had like a real mid-century modern hillside. Yeah. Hastily conversation pit to choke people in.
It's a castle to stew in, and that's what I love about it. Let's see. Eli, going back, Eli, who posed this question initially, Ahsoka Season 2 is a great opportunity for future high fantasy, but I also think both the new Jedi Order film and the Dawn of the Jedi film have potential for more high fantasy. I know we touched upon that a little bit, but I think Eli's right there. Anytime you're setting up or rebooting a mythical order of warrior monks, good chance to pull some swords from stones and talk about it.
Follow up one more time here with Jay, who said Kim and Skeleton Crew is great. That's an example of definitely plucked from high fantasy. The owl in the observatory. I do not want to see her interacting with Luthen Rail, though, because the tone of Andor doesn't match. And then immediately, or maybe I do.
Maybe I do too. I think that would be hilarious.
Yeah, that's a no bullshit owl, and I think she'd give it to Luthen straight.
I keep my mind a sunless sky. Do you? Let me tell you, I'll find your way out. I'll find the way out of there.
Oh my God! What if like Luthen's ultimate fate is he crosses people on the worm planet, and it's like little worms with top hats murder Luthen.
That might be it. I'm telling you, that's the final arc of Andor season 2 is they find the one former source of information they need to get the plans out and all it's Meeber. It's Meeber Gascon, just a real rendered frog just sitting in the corner.
That would be so great. And then Luthen murders him. Not because I want him to be murdered, just gets the vibe of Andor. I want Meeber to live a long, happy life. Jennifer, you seen any comments or questions that you'd like to highlight?
No, you're highlighting all the ones I loved here. This is an interesting point, Amaranth. In self-reflection, I wonder why I don't care for the weirdness of the EU more. I like a lot of the weirdness of the EU. I think it just got too like overwhelming for me. I don't know, like where I don't know what happened, but I do love some of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as knowledgeable about the EU, but it brought us some great pulp and weirdness, like the Night Sisters riding the Rancors, right? I bumped against EU stuff that wasn't weird, but felt tonally wrong for Star Wars because it felt too 90s, 2000s hip. I bumped against EU when it made Chewie look like, a badass bounty hunter with a flat top.
Oh, right.
Which was it?
me,
Everyone always points out to me it was a disguise. Yeah, I got it, but the figure sold. That was the problem.
Yeah,
the figure sold.
And it's just a lot of the design stuff didn't, I think, have an element of whimsy. Like Vader's terrifying and amazing design, but there's something still whimsical. He's got a cape. It's not just trying to be cool. And I think it felt a little bit too modern and a little bit too on the nose in its design. So that's the EU stuff I bumped against. I'm not aware of anything that was too like pulpy in EU for my tastes.
I obviously bumped against it from early on, but it wasn't necessarily that. And you can see easy to poke fun of, Han fighting the weasel or whatever the hell that picture is that goes on. But I don't bring that up to poke fun at it. I bring that up sometimes that those same folks were fighting against the whimsy of the modern Star Wars and many other things, which we get into tomorrow on Kathleen Kennedy's episode. But so it's that's almost like the Spaceball thing where I'm like, really? But you can't ignore this. You can't ignore IG-88 mating with the Death Star, or whatever the hell that was. Like that's wild and weird and over the top, and you're using that to go against a girl from nowhere. Like it just, that's where I over the years have rubbed against it. It not necessarily was the wild and weirdness, because I wasn't super familiar with it. And I like when it's moved. The Night Sisters, great example. Even Thrawn, Rook coming back and just kind of fitting into the emotional canon of modern Star Wars is what I like it.
A couple of great thoughts here from Ozvetnik 1138. I pretended it was another Wookiee. The infamous Chewie Banner Hunter 8984M says, for me, I bumped up against how it felt more sci-fi than fantasy whimsy. For me, that is certainly that was a huge obstacle for me. Even when the Thrawn books first came out and I was reading them and there was no other Star Wars and I was so delighted. I didn't like that Obi-Wan Kenobi couldn't keep talking to Luke and he needed to move on, and I really didn't like the Ysalamiri.
Ysalamiri, I love
being able to block the Force. I did not like those bubbles. And
I liked it.
What did you like about it, Jen?
I don't know.
Debate.
I don't know, because it was just weird. I think that's my problem. I just like anything weird and different, and I was so desperate at the time, right? Because there was no other new Star Wars. I was hungry. True. And the EU fed me. Was it the best meal?
I don't know. For me, it was just sort of the it's the way it felt to me. I think coming from a lot of comic books that tried to give superheroes like a weakness, and everybody's like, it's a pain in the ass when Superman's so powerful, so let's depower him a little bit. And for me, I think it was the Force is all around us, except if Thrawn discovers some anti-Force guys to make a bubble, and then Luke doesn't have powers. It felt is 8984. I'm saying a little more sci-fi.
Oh, and I should my pronunciation's wrong. I did a whole video on this, and I heard Timothy Zahn saying how to say it correctly. Now I can't remember. I think it's like Ysalamiri. I said Ysalamiri, which is it's almost like it's like a Salamiri. I'll have to look at my old video. I don't know.
I'm just gonna say, if you wanted people to pronounce the name that you made up correctly, you could help them out.
Give it to us phonetically.
It's not like he's like, I'm sorry, it's my grandmother's name. Be respectful, learn how to pronounce it. Man made it up and started it with a Y.
Now we're in George R. R. Martin territory where we have an entire show saying Dothraki, and he's the producer on the show. Then he comes out and says, "Oh, Dothraki!" Like, what are you doing? Zahn loved that. I think he loved that.
Yes, he did.
I restarted the Ysalamiri wars. I'll give him another chance at some point. Is what I reacted to when I read those books in 1991.
No, a lot of people are siding with you.
No, a lot of other people like them, which I have nothing but respect for. And I think that, to me, like the High Republic played some of those ideas in a way that felt more grounded, because I feel like the monsters in the High Republic, which I don't want to spoil, are more like they are of the Force because they're sort of they're actively, hatefully taking it from users and cutting them off from it, as opposed to a bubble of Yeah. Anyway.
But the High Republic is a great example too of I'm not too only finished phase 1 as I've said here for a while, just got busy with life, but yeah, the Drengir, like these plant monsters yelling meat, like that worked. It worked.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Geode worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nameless.
Anyway, sorry, I did not mean to go through a long bit of Thrawn counseling from 800 years ago.
Yeah. Absolutely. Maddie Gunner brought this up here. I know we're here for a few more minutes. If you got questions, comments, super chats, anything, get them in now. Maddie Gunner checking in from the UK. Would love a Star Wars take on something like The Witcher. Maybe not as dark and graphic to take away from what Star Wars is, but always love those stories. Yeah, a lot of Witcher fans, both shows and games. I'm not super familiar with them. So the only thing, what would that mean? More bare butts? How does that work? I don't know. I only watched like one episode of Witcher.
How
More
was
bathing,
it?
right? I haven't watched The Witcher. I understand there's bathing.
There's a lot of bathing. Yeah. We got Chimera. Just the people wanted the camera to pan down a little more with Chimera. I get it. Is that what you're saying, Maddie? I'm kidding. I'm undercutting your point. Yes. But yeah, I love the idea.
This came to us from our friend Michael McCarsell before we even started recording, so we should make sure to share it. Short answer: I hope so to more high fantasy mysticism. I know it's a cliche at this point, but the Mortis stuff is one of my favorite Star Wars stories. I love the weird fantasy of it, and would love more. I wonder if part of the reason that Mortis does seem to be pretty universally loved is that it is. We're introduced to it. It's all character based, right? It's whatever you think of the design or the ability to turn into big, flapping birdie monsters. It's about Anakin. It's about Kenobi and Ahsoka's worry about Anakin. It's about the relationship between the father, the son, and the daughter. It's so relationship based. Maybe that's what makes people okay with it.
Yeah, with the Flappy Birdie people. Yeah, absolutely.
I just like their costumes.
And Maddie confirms. No, he's talking about more butts and baths. That's what he's talking about in Star Wars now. Yeah.
Star Wars : butts. Sure, that's the new
baths.
The new Sean Levy film.
That's it. That's the one starring Ryan Gosling. Oh, there we go.
Oh my gosh, that's right. We forgot about Ryan Gosling being in the mix. Where does he fit into all this?
In a bath, in a bathtub.
Oh, he's top talent.
There you go. There you go. All right, I have nothing else to start. I think we got to it.
I think we did.
We saw the same one.
Yep.
Jay from nowhere.
Jay from nowhere. How dare you, Jay from nowhere?
That's funny.
How dare
funny.
you, sir?
I mean, like that. But look, it worked. It got the fans talking, and we were excited. Like, sure, why not? People are always like, "Oh, bring a hot Mara Jade. Bring us some hot fellas without some shirts, walking in water."
Is Ryan Gosling the response to Hot Mara Jade? Is that what it is?
Don't know. Think about that.
I mean,
Ryan
not
Gosling
wrong if it is.
As Mara James. What?
As Mara Jade.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of great butts ideas in the in the
yeah.
chat.
Oh wait. All right, Jay. I like this. The Lando movie, Hot Fellas Without Shirts.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Rebooty. Thank you, Phil. Get back to work, okay? You have some art to make there. All right, what do you do?
Max Rebooty.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
The whole Max Rebo, and it's like a 1960s, 70s, like a lot of nudist colonies, and Max is out there with his butt.
Yeah,
playing the keyboard.
Yeah, it's like a Twilight Zone episode. All right, Maddie, you want butts and bats? You got it. It's Max Rebo.
Studio 66, where all the Jedi go to party and to die.
Yeah, I want an episode that's just I want an anthology Star Wars series that just goes all around the galaxy, and we get your pod race episode, but then we go to the Outlander Club and just spend an hour going on with all the 22 stories in the Outlander Club.
Oh yeah, there's some good good stories to tell.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you, LQ. We had Yord. I forgot about that moment. That was such a great moment. See,
Mhm.
we need
Yep.
more stuff like that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think this is probably a good way to end. JJ Hawkins, is Max Rebo's butt his shoulder blades? This is what we love about
Ooh.
high fantasy. These questions that are philosophical and they really depend on your own point of view.
And the
Love it.
anatomy. Mm-hmm.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Forgot
Love it.
about that one.
This is the fun part. This is the fun part of Force Center going live.
Yep. No
Going
editing.
blue.
No editing.
Oh,
Going
boy.
live and blue, like Max Rebooty. Thank you, Eli, for this great high fantasy question. It's really great to see in live time everybody's different ideas and everybody working through them. This has been such a great chat as always to see everybody thinking through what do I like and what don't I like and why. Thank you, chat.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you indeed. That's it. Are we wrapping up? We doing this? We wrapping up, kids?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's go home. Yeah, Jed says yeah. A lot of fun. As we said, we're live here. This episode gets released as an audio podcast later. And then tomorrow we got our big episode on the week in Kathleen Kennedy news. And does it get a little spicy? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We had a good time discussing all aspects of the stories in the news cycle and the revelations. So tune in tomorrow for that. You can find us on social media, especially Blue Sky on Force Center Pod. Don't forget you get merch at TeePublic at teepublic.com/user/Force Center, or if you're watching on YouTube, fourth wall link down below. If you're here, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, all those good things as well. Thanks to everyone who tuned into the charity stream last Friday. And as we had said, and we've got a couple of them, if you go back to that episode, hopefully watch it, enjoy what we talked about, but also if you leave a super thanks, that money will still go towards the charities we are highlighting, Trans Lifeline and St. Baldrick's Foundation, working on childhood cancers there. So thank you again for those that showed up. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Force Center. Me, catnapsuck.com. Jennifer, where can they find you? And as we will learn tomorrow, the beefs you have online.
Oh my gosh, the beefs I have online. You can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky at Jennifer Landa and TikTok at Jennifer Landa 1138, where I have lots of beef with Lisa Frank's son. It's just like I have one enemy, and not even of my doing. He's my enemy. I'm his enemy, I guess. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah.
Joseph, thank you, sir, for choosing that wonderful question. Eli, thanks for the question. Where can they find and follow you as we get out of here?
Yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky in particular, and you can go to my website, josephscrimshaw.com, for updates on the film I'm working on. I'm editing away. If you would like to help me out, you can check out the link to give a one-time tax-deductible donation to the expensive post-production I need to do for the film. And I'll also throw this up here from our friend Ken Plume, because, hey, it's a good one. Ken Plume says Ryan Gosling is playing Juiced Ken.
I'm Juiced Ken. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Plume. All right, that's it. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time here on Force Center.